I never thought my biggest problem in life would be a 50-something woman with a bad haircut and a burning desire to micromanage the universe, but life has a funny way of surprising you. For 15 years, I'd lived in Oak Creek Estates, a neighborhood that was, for the most part, exactly what its name suggested: quiet, leafy, and uneventful. I run a small landscaping and general contracting business from my home, which means my property is my business card. The lawn is always edged, the hedges are always trimmed, and the driveway is always clear. It's not about vanity, it's about professionalism. My son, Leo, who was 16 at the time, was a good kid. He got decent grades, played soccer, and spent most of his free time either kicking a ball against the garage door or buried in some video game. We were quiet, we kept to ourselves, and we paid our dues. Our homeowners association was, for most of those 15 years, a joke. It was run by a group of retirees whose primary function was to organize the annual 4th of July block party and send out a passive-aggressive newsletter about pet waste twice a year. Dues were low, rules were common sense, and nobody bothered you as long as your house wasn't actively on fire. It was a system that worked because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and the unspoken agreement to just let people live their lives. It was peaceful. It was simple. And then, Brenda moved in. Brenda bought the corner house on the main cul-de-sac, a nice 2-story colonial that had belonged to the Hendersons, a sweet old couple who retired to Florida. From the moment her moving truck arrived, she was a presence. She introduced herself not with a friendly wave, but with a clipboard and a series of pointed questions about property lines and approved fence materials. Within 6 months, she had somehow managed to get herself elected president of the HOA. The old guard, tired and frankly intimidated by her manic energy, had practically handed her the gavel. They probably thought it would be easier than arguing with her. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The changes started small, like a slow-leaking poison. First came the email memo about trash receptacles. They could no longer be visible from the street, except for a 12-hour window on collection day. This was a nuisance for everyone, involving a lot of hauling cans back and forth from behind houses. Then came the rules on holiday decorations. A strict 30-day limit. Anything up before the day after Thanksgiving or after New Year's Day would incur a fine. Halloween was a particular point of contention for her. She deemed some of the decorations tacky and inappropriate for a community of this stature. The stature, as far as I could tell, was that of a perfectly average middle-class suburb. Most people grumbled but complied. It was easier than fighting. The fines were only $25, after all. It was annoying, but it wasn't war. Not yet. My first personal run-in with Brenda was over a small utility trailer I kept parked on the far side of my driveway, tucked neatly beside a row of arborvitae. I used it to haul equipment for my business. It had been in that exact spot for over a decade. One afternoon, I found a bright orange violation sticker slapped on the windshield. According to Brenda, citing a bylaw nobody had ever heard of, commercial equipment couldn't be stored in public view. I called her, aiming for diplomacy. "Brenda, it's Frank Miller over on Maple Drive," I said, keeping my voice even. "I got a sticker on my trailer. It's been there for years, never been an issue." "Rules are rules, Frank," she'd said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're trying to uphold certain standards in this community. A rusty old trailer doesn't exactly scream for upscale living, does it?" My trailer wasn't rusty, and our neighborhood was far from upscale, but I let it slide. I explained it was essential for my livelihood. She was unmoved. She suggested I pay for off-site storage. I ended up building a small, HOA-approved fence extension to hide the trailer, costing me a weekend and a few $100s in materials. It was galling, but again, I chose peace. I had a business to run and a son to raise. I didn't have time for a protracted war over a trailer. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The trailer incident had put me on her radar, and Brenda was the kind of person who never forgot a perceived challenge to her authority. The real war began on a Tuesday morning in early summer. I walked out to get the paper and was hit with a smell that could peel paint. There, in the middle of my meticulously manicured front lawn, was a ripped-open black trash bag. Coffee grounds, rotting banana peels, greasy takeout containers, and what looked like the remains of a fish dinner were strewn across the grass. It was disgusting. My first thought was that a raccoon had gotten into someone's trash and dragged a prize into my yard. I was annoyed, but it was just one of those things. I got a shovel and another bag, scraped the foul-smelling mess off my lawn, and spent an hour trying to mitigate the greasy stain it left behind. I hosed the area down, sprinkled it with baking soda, and tried to forget about it. 2 days later, there was an envelope taped to my front door. It was from the HOA. Inside was a formal violation notice and a $50 fine for improper disposal of household waste and failure to maintain property aesthetics. I stared at the letter in disbelief. She couldn't possibly think this was my trash. I marched over to her house, the letter crumpled in my fist. I was still trying to be reasonable. I was convinced it was a simple misunderstanding. She answered the door wearing a pink velour tracksuit and a smug expression, as if she'd been expecting me. "Brenda," I started, holding up the letter. "There's been a mistake. I got a fine for that trash on my lawn. It wasn't mine. An animal must have dragged it over from someone else's can." Brenda crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "Frank, we all have to take responsibility. The rule is clear. If the trash is on your property, it's your responsibility. And frankly, I'm not surprised. I've seen your boy, Leo, having his friends over. Teenagers can be so careless." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? Leo had nothing to do with this." "Oh, I'm sure," she said, her voice oozing sarcasm. "He and his friends were out in the yard the other night, kicking that soccer ball around. It's not a big leap to assume they got hungry, ordered some food, and couldn't be bothered to find a trash can. This is exactly the kind of decline in standards I'm trying to prevent." I was floored by the accusation. She had fabricated an entire narrative out of thin air. "That's an outrageous thing to say," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. "My son would never do that. He's a good kid." "They're all good kids until they're caught," she sniffed. "Just pay the fine, Frank. Clean up after your son and let's move on. Consider this a warning. If it happens again, the fines will increase." Daily she gave me a tight, insincere smile and closed the door in my face. I stood on her perfectly manicured porch, fuming. This wasn't about trash or standards anymore. This was a personal attack. She had crossed a line by bringing my son into her petty crusade. I went home and talked to Leo. He was genuinely hurt by the accusation. "Dad, I swear, it wasn't me. We just kicked the ball around for a bit and came inside. We didn't have any food." I believed him completely. Leo was many things, occasionally lazy, sometimes forgetful about his chores, but he was not a liar or a slob. My resolve hardened. I wasn't just going to pay the fine and let this go. Brenda had picked a fight, and now she was going to get one. The following week, it happened again. Another bag, another disgusting mess on the exact same spot on my lawn. This time it was moldy bread, eggshells, and the stinking, silvery skins of several onions. It was infuriating, but this time, I was prepared. Before cleaning it up, I took a dozen pictures from every conceivable angle. Then, another envelope appeared on my door. This time, the fine was $100, with a note scrawled at the bottom in Brenda's aggressive handwriting: "Second notice. Further violations will result in a lien against your property." A lien? The threat was absurd, disproportionate, and utterly terrifying. A lien could affect my credit, my business, my ability to sell my home. She was threatening my financial stability over a bag of garbage she was baselessly accusing my son of dumping. My anger was now mixed with a cold dread. This woman was not just a nuisance, she was a genuine menace. The community was becoming a minefield. A few neighbors offered me sympathetic looks but scurried away when they saw Brenda watching from her window. They were afraid. She had cultivated an atmosphere of fear where any association with a violator could put you next on her list. The friendly waves and casual chats that had defined our neighborhood were being replaced by nervous glances and silence. Brenda was methodically dismantling the very fabric of our community, one petty rule at a time. My only real ally in all of this was Arthur, my next-door neighbor. Arthur was a widower in his late 70s, a retired electrical engineer who had lived in his house since it was built. He was quiet, sharp as a tack, and had seen everything. I went over to vent my frustration, and he listened patiently, nodding as he sipped his iced tea. "She's a tyrant in a tiny kingdom," Arthur said after I'd finished my rant. "Power does strange things to people who've never had any. Especially when the power is meaningless." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "You know, after that string of car break-ins on the next street over last fall, I installed a few security cameras. One of them is pointed right at my driveway, but it gets a pretty clear view of your front lawn. The angle might be a bit wide, but it sees everything that happens over there." A spark of hope ignited in my chest. "Arthur, could we check the footage?" "Already planned on it," he said with a wry smile. "Let's see what the little electronic eye has to say about your mysterious trash problem." We spent the next hour hunched over his computer monitor, scrolling through hours of grainy, nighttime footage. It was tedious work. We saw cars driving by, a stray cat darting across my lawn, the sprinkler system coming on at 4 a.m. and then, at 2:17 a.m. on the night the second bag of trash appeared, we saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows near the street. They were wearing a fuzzy bathrobe and slippers, moving with a strange, furtive energy. The figure walked directly to the center of my lawn, dropped a black bag, gave it a little kick to make sure it tore open, and then scurried back the way they came, disappearing into the darkness in the direction of Brenda's house. "Well, I'll be," Arthur whispered, leaning closer to the screen. "Is that?" He zoomed in. The image was blurry, but the distinctive waddle and the fuzzy pink bathrobe were unmistakable. It was Brenda. She was setting me up. She was personally dumping her own garbage on my lawn and then fining me for it, all while slandering my son. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, followed by a wave of triumphant vindication. "I've got her," I said, my voice low. "She's done." "This is good, Frank," Arthur said, saving the video file to a thumb drive. "This is very good. But be smart about it. A woman like that, when she's cornered, she gets vicious. Don't just show it to her. That gives her time to invent a lie. You need to use this strategically." His words tempered my anger with caution. He was right. A direct confrontation would just lead to more denials and accusations. I had the proof, but I needed a plan. The threat of a lien still loomed. I decided it was time to stop being a reasonable neighbor and start being a strategic opponent. It was time to call a lawyer. I found a lawyer, a man named David Chen, who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. He had a reputation for being thorough and aggressive. I sat in his sterile, book-lined office and laid out the whole story, from the trailer incident to the trash, the fines, the false accusations against Leo, and finally, the video on the thumb drive. He listened without interruption, his face impassive. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is a classic case of board member overreach and harassment," he said. "The video is your silver bullet for the trash issue. It's clear-cut evidence of malicious intent. We can get the fines dropped and likely sue her for defamation and harassment. However," he added, holding up a finger, "that only solves your immediate problem. It doesn't remove her from power. She'll still be the HOA president, and she will make your life, and the lives of anyone who supports you, a living hell. She will find other ways to come after you. To truly solve this, you need to cut the head off the snake." "How do I do that?" I asked. "People like this Brenda," David said, "this level of vindictiveness and obsession with control, it's rarely confined to just one area. It's a personality type. I'd be willing to bet my fee that if she's manufacturing evidence to fine you over garbage, she's probably playing fast and loose with other things." namely, the money he leaned forward. As a homeowner in the association, you have the legal right to inspect the financial records. The books, the receipts, the contracts. Everything. It's in the bylaws of almost every HOA in the country. He explained the process. I would need to submit a formal, written request. They would be legally obligated to comply within a certain time frame. Look for patterns, he advised. Look for payments to companies you've never heard of. Look for invoices that seem vague or overpriced. Look for anything that benefits her or her friends on the board directly. If you find something, then we don't just have a case of harassment. We have a case of potential fraud. And that's how you remove her from power for good. I left his office with a clear mission. This was no longer just about a $50 fine or a bag of trash. It was about protecting my family, my property, and my community from a corrupt bully. I went home and, with David's help, drafted a formal request to inspect all HOA financial records for the past 2 years, the period covering Brenda's presidency. I sent it via certified mail, so there would be a record of her receiving it. The response was predictable. Brenda called me, furious. "What is the meaning of this, Frank? Are you accusing me of something? This is an outrageous harassment of the board." I remained calm, just as David had instructed. "Not at all, Brenda," I said coolly. "I'm just a concerned homeowner doing my due diligence. It's my right, according to the bylaws you're so fond of quoting." There was a sputtering silence on the other end of the line before she slammed the phone down. A week later, I received a thick manila envelope containing photocopies of the HOA's financial statements. Arthur and I spread them out on my dining room table. At first glance, everything looked plausible. There were receipts for lawn care, payments to the electric company for the streetlights, insurance premiums. But as we dug deeper, we started to notice things. The first red flag was the landscaping contract. For the past year, the HOA had been paying a company called Prestige Property Management a flat fee of $2,000 a month to mow the small common areas and maintain the flower beds at the neighborhood entrance. This was astronomically high. My own company could have done the same job for a quarter of that price. I'd never heard of Prestige Property Management, and a quick search online revealed they had no website, no phone number, and no physical address beyond a P.O. box in the next town over. The second red flag was a series of invoices for community repairs. They were vague, listing things like fence maintenance and signage upkeep for thousands of dollars. The invoices were from another generic-sounding company, Suburban Solutions LLC. Like the other company, it was a ghost online. Arthur, with his engineer's mind for details, noticed something else. "Look at the invoices, Frank," he said, pointing a trembling finger at one of the pages. "The font. The layout. They're identical to the invoices from Prestige Property Management. Just the company name is different. It's like someone used the same template for both." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I did a state business registration search for both companies. The registered agent for Prestige Property Management was listed as a Brenda Wallace. For Suburban Solutions LLC, it was a B.J.O. Wallace. I remembered from her incessant introductions when she first moved in that her middle name was Jean. Wallace was her maiden name. She was billing the HOA, our money, through 2 shell companies that she owned. She was paying herself thousands of dollars a month for jobs that were either not being done at all or were being done for a fraction of the cost she was charging. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was embezzlement. This was a crime. Armed with the video and now irrefutable proof of financial fraud, David Chen helped me and Arthur prepare our case. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the perfect venue. It was public, it was official, and Brenda would be required to be there. We spent the next few days quietly reaching out to other neighbors we trusted, people who had also been unfairly targeted by Brenda's reign of terror. We told them we had something important to share at the meeting and that they needed to be there. We didn't give details, only that it was crucial for the future of the neighborhood. Word began to spread. The night of the annual meeting, the community center's multipurpose room was packed. Usually, these meetings attracted a dozen or so of the most bored retirees. Tonight, there were over 100 people. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the back wall. Brenda, sitting at the head table with her two crony board members, looked out at the crowd with a mixture of pride and suspicion. She probably thought the high turnout was a testament to her effective leadership. She ran through the agenda with her usual brisk, self-important efficiency. She reported on the successful implementation of new community standards, the fiscal responsibility of the board, and the unfortunate necessity of levying fines to ensure compliance. When she said that, she shot a pointed glare directly at me. I met her gaze and held it, my face a mask of calm. Finally, she reached the last item on the agenda, new business and homeowner comments. "Does anyone have any new business to bring before the board?" she asked, scanning the room with an air of boredom, clearly expecting no response. I stood up. A hush fell over the room. "I do," I said, my voice clear and steady. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Very well, Frank. The floor is yours. Please be brief." "I will," I said. "I'd like to address the issue of property maintenance and the fines associated with it. Specifically, the fines I received for trash being dumped on my lawn, for which my son was publicly and repeatedly blamed." I could see Leo, sitting with my wife in the third row, sit up a little straighter. "That issue has been addressed," Brenda snapped. "You were found in violation. This is not the forum to relitigate old grievances." "On the contrary," I said, pulling the thumb drive from my pocket. "I think this is the perfect forum. You see, I have some new evidence I'd like to share with my neighbors." Arthur, sitting by the projector we had set up earlier, gave me a nod. I inserted the drive into the laptop. "This is security footage from the night of the most recent violation." I clicked the play button. The dark, grainy image of my front lawn appeared on the large screen behind Brenda. The room was silent except for the low hum of the projector. Then, we all watched as the figure in the fuzzy pink bathrobe waddled onto the screen, dropped the trash bag, and scurried away. A collective gasp went through the crowd. People started murmuring, pointing at the screen and then at Brenda, whose face had gone from smug to ashen white. Her pink velour tracksuit suddenly seemed like a confession. This is a fabrication," she stammered, her voice a high-pitched squeak. "It's a deep fake. He's trying to discredit me." Nobody was buying it. The evidence was right there, 10 feet tall. "It's funny you should mention discrediting," I said, my voice turning hard. "Because while I was looking into this, I decided to exercise my right as a homeowner to review the HOA's financial records. And I found some very interesting things." I switched the projector's input to a spreadsheet I had prepared. On the screen, in bold red letters, were the names Prestige Property Management and Suburban Solutions LLC, next to columns showing tens of thousands of dollars in payments from our HOA accounts. "These two companies," I announced to the room, "have been paid over $40,000 of our money in the last year for landscaping and repairs. I'm a contractor. I can tell you those services should have cost us less than $10,000. But the interesting thing is, these companies don't seem to exist. They have no offices, no websites. Just a P.O. box." I paused for dramatic effect. "And a registered agent. A woman named Brenda Wallace." The room erupted. People were shouting, demanding answers. Brenda's two board members looked at her in horror, slowly pushing their chairs away from her as if she were contagious. "It's all lies," Brenda shrieked, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "He's a disgruntled homeowner with a vendetta. He's the one who should be investigated." But her authority was gone, evaporated in the space of 5 minutes. A man in the back of the room stood up. It was Tom, a neighbor I knew was an off-duty police detective. "Brenda," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I think you should sit down and not say another word. What we've seen here tonight constitutes credible evidence of multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. A formal police report will be filed." Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The fight completely drained out of her. She collapsed back into her chair, a deflated balloon of velour and malice. The meeting was over. Her reign was over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The district attorney's office took the case, and the evidence was so overwhelming that Brenda had no choice but to plead guilty. She was convicted of felony fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and, most importantly, was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, every single dollar she had stolen. The court also issued a restraining order, preventing her from holding any position on any board or association for 10 years. On top of that, David Chen filed a civil suit on my behalf for defamation against my son. She settled out of court, issuing a formal written apology to Leo and paying a small sum which we donated to the Youth Soccer League. Her house went on the market almost immediately. The for sale sign on her lawn was a monument to her spectacular downfall. Within 2 months, she was gone. A nice young family with 2 little kids moved in. The first thing they did was put up a basketball hoop. Nobody said a word. With Brenda and her cronies gone, the HOA had to be rebuilt from the ground up. Arthur, the reluctant hero, agreed to serve as the interim president. We held a special election and voted in a new board made up of reasonable, long-time residents who understood that an HOA's job is to serve the community, not rule it. Our first act was to have a ceremonial shredding of Brenda's ridiculous rule book. We rolled back everything to the simple, common-sense bylaws we'd had for years. The neighborhood transformed almost overnight. It was like a cloud had lifted. People started talking to each other again. Kids played in the street. The 4th of July block party that year was the biggest and best it had ever been. We used a portion of the restitution money Brenda had paid back to hire a band and rent a bounce house. It felt like we were celebrating more than just the nation's independence, we were celebrating our own. My reputation, far from being tarnished, was elevated. I was the guy who had stood up to the bully. People would stop me on my morning walk to thank me. My business even got a boost from new clients within the neighborhood. But I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to be left alone. About a year later, I was in the checkout line at a grocery store in the next town over. I glanced ahead and saw a familiar figure. It was Brenda. She looked smaller, diminished. Her hair was a mousy brown, no longer the aggressive blonde helmet she used to sport. She was wearing a drab grey sweatshirt and pushing a cart with a few generic brand items in it. She saw me, and for a second, a flicker of panic crossed her face. She looked away, pretending she hadn't seen me. As she paid for her groceries, she fumbled with her purse, her hand shaking slightly. All the arrogance and condescension were gone, replaced by a deep, weary shame. I didn't feel anger or even satisfaction. I just felt a strange, detached pity. She was just a sad, broken woman who had let her own bitterness consume her. She scurried out of the store without a word, and I never saw her again. Looking back on it all now, the whole ordeal seems almost surreal. It was a stressful, infuriating chapter of my life, but it taught me something important. It taught me that communities are fragile things, and they're only as strong as the willingness of their members to protect them. Most of us just want to live quiet lives, to not make waves. But sometimes, the waves come for you, and you have a choice: you can let them pull you under, or you can learn to surf. We let a petty tyrant take control because it was easier to comply than to fight. We paid the small fines and tolerated the ridiculous rules because we thought it would keep the peace. But peace bought at the cost of reason and respect isn't peace at all. It's just a slow surrender. It took a bag of stinking garbage on my lawn to wake me up, to make me realize that you can't ignore a problem like Brenda and hope it goes away. Bullies, whether they're on the playground or in the HOA boardroom, only get stronger when they're met with inaction. They feed on fear and apathy. Standing up to her wasn't easy. It cost me time, money, and a lot of sleepless nights. But in the end, it wasn't just my lawn I was fighting for. It was for Arthur, who deserved to enjoy his retirement in peace. It was for the young family who wanted to put up a basketball hoop for their kids. It was for my son, Leo, to show him that you never, ever let someone falsely accuse you or the people you love. You stand up, you tell the truth, and you fight back, not with anger, but with evidence and reason. Today, Oak Creek Estates is back to being the quiet, leafy, and uneventful place I fell in love with all those years ago. The HOA is a force for good, a genuine asset to the community. My son is in college now, studying to be an engineer like Arthur. And me? I'm still running my business, still keeping my lawn perfectly edged. My trailer is parked right where it's always been, out in the open, and nobody says a thing. The peace we have now feels different. It's not the fragile, passive peace of avoidance we had before. It's a robust, resilient peace that was earned. And it's a peace I will never again take for granted.